The thing about precious metals that is interesting, it's probably the most vilified asset class by we'll call the mainstream media. And if you want to just use some basic reverse psychology, why is that so, right? I mean, because at the end of the day, history, the precious metals have always withstood every financial crisis in history. As I mentioned earlier, if you had a coin from the Roman Empire or back to the Greeks and it was made of gold or silver, you could be 2,000 years later and it's still carrying value. Now, everyone always thinks this time it's different, right? We're too modern for that. But, you just look at what's going on. If we're too modern for precious metals, then why is the Chinese government, the Russian government, why does the U.S. still hold on to their stockpile, right? Why do the Europeans still hold on to their stockpile? I think we both agree is don't listen to what they say, watch what they do.
Welcome to Rethinking the Dollar. Today I'm excited to ask my guest, Chris Blasi, founder and CEO of Neptune Global Holdings, LLC. He's joining us today to discuss the global economy as well as his thoughts on the future of the fiat dollar. And also, Mr. Blasi is a veteran in the financial and precious metals markets for over 30 plus years. Today he's going to share with us an interesting financial instrument he has over at Neptune Global Holdings called the PMC Ounce. So Chris Blasi, welcome to Rethinking the Dollar.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
Looking forward to talking to you further in regards to what you're doing, but also to get your take on what's happening around us. And before I actually dive into that, I tend to start off with some Rethinking the Dollar questions. And the first question is, what comes to mind when Chris Blasi hears the words Rethinking the Dollar?
So what I think is people who want to take a serious look at a currency that's a fiat currency that is, backed by the full faith and credit of a nation that on paper is insolvent. How long can this continue, right? I mean, we know there's a lot of elements behind the dollar that keeps it supported. The military, basically, there's no other really good option in the world moving away from the dollar, but that doesn't mean it's permanently sustainable. So I think, from reading and learning about you and your take and what you're educating people on, we're on the same side. We know that inevitably, just history, if you could just force your way, the Roman Empire would have stayed in place, right?
Very true.
Or the Greek Empire, or any of them. It's just not sustainable. And now it's just a matter of when. I think, that's where we are. The fundamentals all say we're going to go through a big change. And that change is going to be pretty destructive for most individuals. And, everyone who's counting on the dollar, right? The pensions, the insurance companies. The domino effect is phenomenal. But that's what I think when we talk about rethinking the dollar.
Well, I do agree. And so the whole idea of rethinking the dollar is to get people to understand the basics of what monetary history and the impact of monetary policy on our financial lives. And so in your opinion, if so, do you think this is probably one of the more important subjects for everyone to begin taking more of an interest in?
I think it's the most important. Besides your family, and something that close to you, our lives are completely impacted by the economy and the currency. I think people don't realize, how their lives will be turned upside down with the dollar being devalued, becoming less relevant. I don't think people really have a grasp of how deep that's going to hurt them. So unfortunately, I think we both agree the mass media and the institutionalized education systems don't have people focusing on that. They have them, I think, divert it onto less important things, get them all churned up and focused on irrelevant things, but the most important, the core, to really what's going to determine the quality of life, they don't want them looking at or being educated on.
Right. And I would agree that, a primary tool is just, social media and all these distractions that keep people's eyes, glued on the here and now as opposed to their own personal finances now as well as in their future. So let me ask you another question. If you were given a chance, if Chris Blasi was given a chance to give like what I call an economic global state of the address or something of that nature, where all, eyes were glued into you, where would you tell them we're currently at and where do you see us going?
So I think we're at the precipice of a fundamental change. People use the term reset, a global reset economically, and I think that's inevitable. If you look at what's happening, it starts at the lower levels. You saw Puerto Rico went bankrupt. We're looking at the state of Illinois that's on the on the verge of bankruptcy. You have states like New Jersey with these states have pensions that are unfunded to the tune of tens of billions and hundreds of billions of dollars, completely unpayable. We are living minute by minute. And now it's just a matter of you have one side who's completely vested in this system, who will not make any changes. And I really submit to you, Mike, that we're past the point of actually just fixing things, right? We actually have to go through a reset. And, I think for folks like you and I who maybe, and our people that listen to us and kind of share our belief, in some respect, as painful as it may be, you kind of want the reset to maybe get to something a little more equitable and fair where we can all just build again. Because right now, what we see is complete inequality. You see banks being bailed out regardless of what they do, and we see the individual carrying all the burden, all the weight. So I think that reset is inevitable. The biggest challenge is when, is it going to require some sort of what they call a black swan event? But there is going to be some, either we'll grind down slowly and then eventually hit an event that will, you think of something that's deteriorating and then it collapses. But, things are pointing that something has to take place in the next couple of years.
Right. I do agree.
Yeah.
Right, I do agree. So, okay, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, so my next question is going to be, because you're in the financial world, you're also a precious metals dealer, so you have your eyes and ears to the ground, and I'm sure you have a lot of contacts globally. So what are some things, we're in the middle of the 2017, what are some things that either really excite you about opportunities coming, or what really concerns you or borderline scares you based upon what you're hearing and what you're seeing in the markets, whether it be here in the U.S. or abroad?
So I'm going to, as far as a macro, I'd like to chat a second about these cryptocurrencies and everyone's euphoria about crypto. Mike, I think people have it completely wrong where we're going with cryptocurrency, right? I hear young people say that if you kind of challenge the validity or the value of cryptocurrencies, they will say a term like you don't understand the technology. Now, the technology, you don't put your money and your wealth in. That's something that's based on technology. If you look at right now, Bitcoin actually has a problem right now with scaling, and their developers have to kind of fix it. Well, that should tell you right there. If your currency has to be constantly fixed by developers, it means it's nothing but software. But there's this magical thinking that a Bitcoin is above the system and somehow is self-healing. And I mean, anyone who really understands technology and when they use a term like distributed database, well, databases need to be maintained. But not to go down the technical rabbit hole, but cryptocurrencies are going to be part of the future. And I think it's a problem. It's going to be embraced by governments and central banks. They're going to move us to a digital currency. And therefore, we're going to lose all our freedoms. Whatever we have left, we will be tracked. Do you know that about 15 years ago when Fed minutes, the Fed talked about putting a time value on money? And what that was is, time value meant I pay Mike $1,000 a week. That $1,000 has $1,000 purchasing power for, say, 90 days. After 90 days, it starts to lose it becomes worth, $900. And then 6 months from now. So that's to force you to be a consumer. Right? They don't want you to be a saver. So think that was not doable until you came out with digital currency, because each unit is its own unique unit with its hashtag and all that. So you could pay someone in 1,000 units and say, okay, Mike, this is worth $1 per unit for the next 90 days. And after that, it's worth 95 cents. So what do? You say, well, instead of watching my wealth evaporate, I'll just go out and buy things. This is to create the ultimate consumer, really, but you have no freedom. You cannot say, I'm going to take a different path, right? I'm going to build wealth, So I think it's where cryptocurrencies are going to take us, and digital currencies is a very scary place from the perspective of if you value kind of your freedom, freedom to choose and do what you want with your money.
Right, I do agree, and so I was actually going to ask you about the cryptocurrency things, and so there's about approximately 1,000 or so out there. So they're coming out as like basically little like IPOs, ICOs, or whatever, and so they're coming out and they're basically appearing to be like little small increments of stock that the commoner can get in just by going to an exchange. And so my question would be on to kind of get into that crypto thing is how can you begin deciphering between which one's real, which one's fake, which one's a scam? What type of software is actually going to be something people actually need and want to use. So how can you distinguish between this technology, being that a lot of people are getting in it now?
And that's a great question. I think the answer is you can't. And most people aren't technologically savvy enough. They can't understand I mean, people will use buzzwords like blockchain and distributed database, but people don't even know what they're talking about. They don't understand it. They just use those terms. And the other thing is, if blockchain is an underlying technology, which it is, which gives the same ability to make any blip unhackable, right? So Bitcoin comes out and people bid it up to 2,000 plus, a Bitcoin. But if I could create the same blip with the same unhacking ability, why would you pay Bitcoin 2,000 if I say, well, mine's only $10, right? I mean, the whole thing doesn't make sense, right? The technology, it's a technology that's going to be used, and it's going to be used by banks and central banks. But the idea of just bidding these blips up, I think is completely misplaced. And with the flood of offerings coming on, as you said, how do you distinguish one for the other? Why would you pay 2,000 for Bitcoin and $10 for this one and $1 for this one? And the scams are going to be rife because since there's absolutely nothing tangible, you're basically sending someone money to be given an electronic blip.
Right.
And I know people who made a religious experience out of this will argue with you and say you don't understand the technology. I said no, but I understand history. All technology gets commoditized. All technology becomes obsolete. All technology becomes hackable. Right? No technology's ever stood up. It all constantly is changing. And do you really want to put your wealth into something that requires individuals to constantly update it? Whereas if I had a Roman coin that was gold, and I sat on it for 2,000 years, no one had to do anything for 2,000 years, and it still has its value. Right. That's what you really want your wealth in.
Right. I do agree completely. Now, let me get on the whole idea of digital ledgers and the blockchain technology. It seems like it's inevitable that we're going to head to this, some people say a one world or one, cashless society type of approach. But my argument, or not argument, but idea would be that we're already currently in a cashless somewhat form, being that most dollars are digital in and of itself. And so it's basically removing cash from the people's hands and able actually use it in a day-to-day transaction. It seems like where we're heading to. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. And you're right. I mean, if you really look at the amount of dollars that are changing hands, dollars in the physical sense, it's a tiny, minuscule part. I mean, that's really, going to the store to buy the coffee. But virtually everything else is by check or credit card. And I think the digital currencies, the cryptocurrencies, that's going to be a more efficient way, right, where checks will become obsolete. And, most banks want to get away from checks, right? They want ACH transfers and such. So it's really just saying the old cashless methods, credit card and check, are obsolete, and now they're going to introduce the digital currency. And it's going to give them so much more power on tracking you. I mean, the ability to track your history on a check, is a little cumbersome and not really valid. I think another scary thing is you take a cryptocurrency, anyone who's ever exchanged or touched that currency becomes part of the record, right? Mm-hmm. And really, do you want that? So say you and I exchange a crypto, and then a year down the road, someone else exchanges it and gets involved in a nefarious act, right? Do we become part of the whole, history of it? You see what I'm saying? I mean, why would anyone want that?
Right. Right.
I don't get it. Right.
Okay. Now, just to play like devil's advocate, some people might say, okay, this guy, he's talking about cryptocurrencies, but yeah, you can make a lot of money in it. And so let's look at, in the Federal Reserve standpoint, like I'm sure you saw that picture recently of Janet Yellen giving her speech, and a gentleman held up a buy Bitcoin sign or something behind her. Did you happen to see that?
Yeah, I did.
And so from that, that I'm sure it helped the popularity of cryptocurrencies grow some fears. Now, give me your thoughts on the idea that, there's someone said about possibility of a Fed coin or something like that. Will central banks eventually get into the blockchain technology where they'll issue something to the public as opposed to, using paper still once this so-called recession kicks in, or when when this economic expansion comes to an end, would that be one of the tools that you think they can probably give the public?
Yeah, Mike, I think that is. I think that's the next step. Is that there'll be a financial event, and one of the as they say, as the mayor of Chicago said, don't let a crisis go to waste. They will use that crisis as the way to usher in, and under the guise of controlling terrorism or illegal activities, we're going to move to this new digital currency, and that way they'll have the full control that they want, that they don't have now. I mean, they have 90% of it now, right? But that will just be the final step. So that's where I say cryptocurrencies aren't going away. Blockchain technology, whatever you want to say, it's not going away. But the form it's going to come in, I mean, people believe it's going to be this liberating element, that the public is going to be transacting in cryptocurrencies outside of the governments and the central banks. I think that's very naive. There's no way that the governments and the central banks are going to allow the public to have their own, off the record financial system. It's just not going to happen. And the other thing people, I don't think, fully grasp is, they think the internet is this, completely free domain. Everything moves along the backbone of the internet, right? We may be hanging off. The backbone is controlled by the government, right? So I think it's naive to think that they don't have the technologies to step in and really control and do and filter and stop anything they want.
Right, I do agree. So we'll see how it all pans out in the future. Now let's get into this whole economic recovery that we're currently in right now. We're 8 years, 96 months, as I read a recent article saying that we're in an economic expansion. Are we in economic expansion, or are we borderline recession? What are your thoughts on what the mainstream media would like to tell us?
So for what I've seen, and I'll say it anecdotally, but on a wide scale, Mike, is since 2008-9. I believe the upper 1%, maybe even 2-3%, are doing extremely well. I think the bottom is always are what they are. They didn't have anything, so there's not much to lose. But I've watched the middle being liquidated. They are being liquidated. I don't see a turnaround for what you would call middle America at all. So there's just this bifurcation. I mean, we're actually looking what we call second world countries' economies. We are becoming what you see in Central and South America, right? Like the Brazils, where they have a small 5% wealthy, which is wealthy business owners and, the political elite and those who have access to power, and everybody else, and no one in between. What differentiated us as a country was the middle class. But now we're becoming part of what the global economy looks like.
Right.
And obviously for us in the U.S., that's a step down.
Right, but every politician will get on the screen and say, we're trying to improve, we're trying to grow the middle class. I mean, that's the backbone of our country. So they're working hard to advance the middle class, aren't they?
Well, we've been here. How many decades have we heard that?
Right.
It's amazing. With all the laws and the efforts and the printing of money, it always ends up with the same thing: the top doing better, the middle taking it. Taking the hit, and nothing changes at the bottom.
Right.
So
hey.
I just don't see it. I hear a lot of talk, but I don't see it.
All right. So now just give you something else. This whole tax rate and the healthcare situation we're going through. We have the debt ceiling. So there's about 3 or 4 major things happening right now heading into the fall. Give me your thoughts on how this will come to an end with the debt ceiling. The idea that we're going to hit 20 trillion if we're not there already. I haven't checked the debt clock lately, but 20 trillion. The Obamacare reform is not looking good, and then Trump's infrastructure tax rate stuff. He wants to drop taxes, which is supposed to spur economic growth, and so we're hearing that they're trying to do some things for us. But what are your thoughts on that?
I think this is just the same rhetoric over and over. I don't think anything's going to materially get better. I think everything is so institutionalized, and there's not going to be any change. I will go back to history. No empire ever rose, saw themselves get in trouble, and then say, let's do the right thing, truly the right thing. And because the people in power are never going to relinquish. And that's never going to change, and it's going to be no different for the U.S. Not at all. I think, there's great books like The Fourth Turning, that talk about things are in cycles, right? And I believe that's accurate, and I believe we're in that fourth turning right now. And that's why it has to be an external event that kind of forces a reset of the system. But what I worry about, Mike, is that the reset is not going to be a great panacea. I think it's going to be take us to kind of a darker place as far as freedom, and they're going to use a crisis for a reset and an implementation of digital currencies and other sorts of policies that, you know, uh, for those of us who had kind of a quaint notion that you could kind of work hard and yeah, I'm not connected. I'm just a regular guy, but make a fairly decent living. That's going to be harder and harder to do.
Right. I do agree. And I tend to believe that, as you mentioned earlier, that there are signs of a second world status. There's been prior guests that mentioned that once this reset occurs, we're ultimately going to be pushed into a third world type status where our neighbors out east that are developing all the BRIC nations, the AIB, all those infrastructures that are being built now to kind of counter the dollar when it is reset. Because I'm assuming you're mentioning the reset as far as the Federal Reserve note no longer being a relied upon currency. And so if we were to go second world, third world status, it's going to be hard for everyone. Give us an idea what it would look like for those second world, third world countries now, how they may be better off in the future, or what? Do you see the role reversing where their first world status, we might be second, third, or give us what it looks like outside this country for countries that are not doing well as we're currently speaking right now?
Sure. So I don't see the outside world rising and having the standard of living that the U.S. did in more of its better years, right? I see more us just kind of getting at their level. So I think that the global vision is going to be still that 5% at the top, that basically in control of everything, and then the worker class below, and that's what we're kind of being pulled down to. Because in the grand scheme of things, right, we're only 330 million people. I mean, yes, 330 million people. We're a small drop in the bucket as far as people go. Right. So just diluting the standard of living for 300 million people isn't going to have billions rise up to what we used to have. And what we had wasn't sustainable. So we're just going to kind of get down to that level. Right. I think that's where we're heading.
Right. Now let's talk about a little bit about the dollar, being that we're rethinking the dollar here. So to give us your idea on the dollar or the Federal Reserve note, outside this country currently, and where you see it going 2, 5, 10 years from now, as far as it being a current reserve status or it not being one. And then if it's not the reserve status, then will there be an implementation of a new type of domestic dollar or domestic coin or something like that might come about? Just give me your thoughts on what could be down the line.
Sure. I know there's a lot of great analysis of what this might be. What I think may happen is there's going to be a couple steps before they take us to their ultimate vision. And I think the first step will be kind of a global crisis, an agreement that there needs to be, from transacting on a business perspective, a global currency. But as far as on a local, like you and I, we're going to still have the dollar. Now, maybe if it moves into a more digital format, it'll still be the dollar. And that will devalue against a global currency, right? I know people like Jim Rickards talk about the SDR, right, which is something that the World Bank has or the IMF has in their back pocket. And I think that would be probably the next step, right? So when you look at a country whose currency is just constantly, like devaluing or revaluing against the dollar, they're not a global currency like the Mexican, currency. We're going to be more like that. The dollar will be local. They'll let the politicians just continue to run things that will just diminish it. But therefore, the global, the Chinese, the Russians, everyone else won't have to deal with it on a global scale.
Right.
And so that's my answer.
Right.
First, the global currency, but you and I will still be transacting in a local devaluing currency.
Right, and it'll be hard to kind of picture that in my mind when, say, for example, like whatever our currency is or however it's valued and measured against. Say, for example, like I'm not sure what the current ratio of the $1 to a Mexican peso is, but I know it's closer to 17, 18 pesos. Imagine a day when whatever that measuring stick is, say the SDR or whatever the yuan back gold, some people say, in dollar terms. Say if it's $20 to one or whatever it is, how hard that's going to be, where it requires that much more because prices are that much inflated to where it's going to be a shock, because most of us are used to getting somewhat of a bang for our buck still to this day, but it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out if the dollar doesn't really purchase anything because of purchasing power and inflation, hyperinflation, and things like that.
Sure, I agree. I mean, that's what we're not used to. If you want to see what I think our future is, you look at a country like Brazil or Argentina and what it means to be there. and how their currencies, what they buy, the purchasing power, and that's we're going to morph more into a role like that.
Right.
And you know, and there we go. And it's going to determine how quickly that goes down by our ongoing policies, right? I think a big thing is going to be when you start seeing states and counties going bankrupt, right? Because like Illinois, what does the feds do? Are the feds going to step in to make people feel better and fund their pensions? That'll just obviously continue to devalue the dollar quicker, or will they let these entities just kind of collapse on their own? Collapse meaning cut the pensions and all that. Those are the wild cards, right? And that's just going to determine how quickly the dollar. But that's why the world's going to want to move away from it, right? They don't want the reserve currency of the world being used like that. And so I think it's going to happen in the next couple of years. I think it's kind of inevitable that we're getting toward that point where this reset has to take place.
All right, now this reset. Now, one of my concerns would be just for those that are not, monetary savvy, financial literate. You mentioned pensions, and so with Illinois and I think Kentucky, California, there's several states that are having problems, and a lot of people, because I do news updates on those stories out there. So a lot of people in the comment section mentioned, I don't really care about what they do, as long as I get my money, and as long as I'm able to spend my check. And so that seems to be the the mindset of those who were actually promised, to receive a pension over 30, 40 years ago. When it comes to financial, retirement instruments like 401ks, IRAs, do you kind of see them all in the same pool of, being promises that may not be able to be made? And if they are met, will the purchasing power be there for people to actually live off of them and do something with them?
Sure. So that's a great question. So not getting into whether pensions should be honored to the dollar, or or is someone going to say, well, you know what, those votes were bought by politicians. I mean, when those deals were struck years ago, there were people who said these are unsustainable. There were people who said in the 1970s and 80s, you can't grow the size of the state government and increase the benefits like that. It's not sustainable. But of course, no one wanted to hear it, and votes were being bought. So that being said, they have one or two things. You can either cut the pensions, which that will have the most violent reaction, right? People just look at the nominal number, right? If I'm promised $1,000 a week check, right, that's what they want to see. So the path will be, you know what? If they need to maybe make people feel good in Illinois and the Fed come in and bail out the state, but the dollar will just devalue. And the person will still get that $1,000 a week, but it's going to buy $500 worth of purchasing power. Right. And isn't that usually the path that nations take, right? It's easier to just destroy the currency and let people still get the nominal amount, as opposed to like saying we're going to be grown-ups now, we're going to get real, and we're going to face facts, and we want to maintain the purchasing power of the dollar, but that means cutting back on the payout. So you keep the payouts what they were, and you let the dollar get destroyed.
All right. Wow.
I mean, it's like being a pensioner in Argentina, right? Right? Hey, you're still getting your check. Or when Russia collapsed, right? They were getting their checks, but the ruble didn't buy anything back in the early 90s.
Right. Whew, that is not something that's exciting news, to say the least. Now let's dive into you kind of gave a good idea of the idea that a reset needs to recur in order for things to kind of balance out, for things to get back to somewhat normalcy. And so that means fiat currencies are going to be in jeopardy. So let's talk about some solutions on how people can, not necessarily hedge, but prepare and protect themselves in the days ahead. So clearly alternatives are needed. Give us your thoughts on how people can begin really, taking action today as far as protecting themselves. Let's talk about, some precious metal things, and share with us your ideas on how to go about, making that happen for those that may not know anything about, precious metals in the past.
Sure. So the thing about precious metals that is interesting, it's probably the most vilified asset class by what we'll call the mainstream media. And if you want to just use some basic reverse psychology, why is that so, right? I mean, because at the end of the day, history, the precious metals have always withstood every financial crisis in history. As I mentioned earlier, if you had a coin from the Roman Empire or back to the Greeks, and it was made of gold or silver, you could be 2,000 years later and it's still carrying value. Now, everyone always thinks this time it's different, right? We're too modern for that. But you just look at what's going on. If we're too modern for precious metals, then why is the Chinese government, the Russian government, why does the U.S. still hold on to their stockpile, right? Why do the Europeans still hold on to their stockpile? I think we both agree is don't listen to what they say, watch what they do, right? They vilify it, but they don't give it up, and others are accumulating it aggressively. So it is still that one rare asset that an individual can buy in even a small increment and hold for themselves outside the system. And you kind of think of it as you see this tidal wave of trouble coming, right? That's going to be the reset, where you can take an asset, take it outside of the system, or hold it in a facility outside the regular system. And until that wave crashes, and hopefully you come out the other end and you still have some wealth in your hand that you can start rebuilding your life from. So, gold and silver are liquid and you can buy and sell at any time. But at the end of the day, it's really financial insurance. It's for, they're propping up the system. Gold and silver price, there's a lot of price interference. Talk about manipulation to keep it suppressed. But you're really holding it for as we go through this churn over the next couple of years, so that you come out the other end with something of value. And that's the core. You don't chase it. I know a lot of people will get people worked up and say, silver is going to be $200 an ounce in the next 30 days or 60 days, and they'll use an event like this Fed meeting. It's guaranteed. I mean, that's crazy, right? I've heard that for years. But you do want to own it and you want to hold it for what's going to transpire over the next 2 to 5 years.
Right. Now, if people actually are starting to begin accumulating more gold, silver, as well as some other metals, is there any chance that because our government is already broken and solvent, what's the chance that they may say, hey, let's turn some of that in, we're coming to get some of that, or the whole idea of confiscating it? What are your thoughts on that? Is that something that may be a possibility, just to kind of be able to get them through, to get the government through their problems?
Sure. So that's a great question. I mean, unfortunately there's a lot of unscrupulous dealers that use the confiscation scare
Mm-hmm.
to get people to not buy actually bullion products, and they get them confused and sell them what they call numismatic coins and proof set coins. And these are coins that sell at huge premiums over the value of the underlying metal. And when you're really buying bullion to survive a financial hurricane, you want just the bullion. So the other confusion is, they point to 1932. And when they ask you to turn in your gold. And two things: confiscation brings up the image of just taking it from you without any compensation. Well, even if you did turn in your gold in 1932, you were compensated. Now, I'm not saying it's fair because it was revalued, but in 1932, we were on the gold standard. And if they wanted to create currency, right, because they wanted to make work jobs during the Depression, they needed gold. Well, they create trillions of dollars now without any gold. So the whole reason for having a gold call in 1932 doesn't exist today. I find it unlikely that they're going to do that. What they may possibly do is, if gold goes up astronomically, people talk about $5,000 and $10,000 plus per ounce, maybe a windfall profit tax. That could be a possibility, and that would be kind of a bridge across. I mean, if you see gold going up, escalating, a person may want to take a little of profits off the table, but that's something you would look at down the road. So even though anything is possible, the reason for gold, quote unquote, confiscation that was done in 32 doesn't exist today. Right. So I think it's not that likely.
Right. Now, as we draw towards the end of our conversation, I want to dive into what you're doing over Neptune Global. What is the PMC ounce? Give us some information into what that is and how you came up with that, and how it's actually helping people nowadays.
Sure. So the PMC ounce stands for the Precious Metals Composite. And this is not an ETF. It's not a fund. But what it is we looked at how precious metals traded. And like any asset, diversification within an asset and even within asset class is important, right? So people say your portfolio should have some stocks, some bonds, and real estate, ideally, if you have those sort of resources. And precious metals were always supposed to be part of a portfolio. And we took it one step further, and we say, well, in the precious metals, you have 4 precious metals. And maybe if you logically weight and have a little of each, you maybe could get a better return. And it's not an actively managed fund, but it's to mitigate some of the volatility. And we know anyone who's followed precious metals, they're volatile. So the PMC ounces, for each PMC ounce you purchase, a fixed amount of gold, silver, platinum, palladium are in an allocated account, are in the client's name in a non-bank depository. And it's weighted. And we actually show the performance of the PMC ounce on the homepage of our website. And what you see is it's not about beating gold and silver, which currently it is since 2008, but that's not its goal. It's really to mitigate the volatility, because part of managing money or your wealth is not just chasing return, but it's mitigating and lessening the volatility, and that's risk. Because, a great example is silver. In 2011, silver spiked up, 2011-12, up to almost $50 an ounce, and people piled in, right? There were people telling people, silver, it's inevitable, it's going to 100 and 200. And where are we today? It's at $16. I mean, it's a very volatile metal. And people that needed to raise money a couple of years after that, thinking that silver was going to be about 100, had to raise money at a huge loss. So not that the PMC ounce can't make the markets not go down, but by having that little exposure also into platinum and palladium, you see it has a smoother ride. And that's why it's been embraced by some analysts, and a lot of clients, as they get exposed to it, see the logic. And the PMC ounce does have a patent,
Right.
because what it did is it bridged the world of, it has the ease of trade like an ETF, but you actually own the physical precious metals. There's no financial instrument between the investor and the underlying asset.
All right, sounds good. Now, is this a vehicle or a tool that can be used by, say, a single mom with a minimum income, minimal disposable income? Is this something that she can get in as well as the 1%, 2%er as well? So is this for everybody, or how would you begin recommending how to what's the minimum someone can have to get involved?
Sure. So it's an asset that may sound like it's really for we'll call the players, right? But it's across all groups, right? Like anyone else, we generally say a minimum of we'd like an account size of a minimum of 100 PMC ounces, right? Some customers will start with a lesser amount and kind of work toward that. It's not that each transaction has to be 100 PMC ounces. And just put it in perspective, a PMC ounce trades for about $85 an ounce. So unlike gold, which is $1,200 an ounce and change, the PMC ounce is like 85, 86. And it's all posted live on our website. But, we are still a full-service precious metals dealer, right? We deal in all the bars and coins, the eagles, the maple leafs. So like anything else, we'll work with a client to see what really fits their needs, their resources best, and also, what they see coming and what they feel most comfortable in. It's just that the PMC ounce is an asset that it's still pure physical precious metals. It's giving a diversified return, and it has a lot of benefits because of that. But like you said, precious metals are appropriate for everyone, Mike. You don't have to be a big player, but you just have to look at a person, look at their situation and what their goals are, and then you just kind of purchase the asset that makes the most sense for them. And that's what we seek to do for our clients.
All right. Well, Chris Blasi, I thank you for taking time to sit down with us here at Rethinking a Dollar. Can you give the audience information on how to follow your work and how to perhaps get involved with what you offer there as far as the PMC ounce, and how can they stay in tune with what you have going on?
Sure. Thanks, Mike. So the best way to learn about us and see, what we offer, and even if you want to experience the PMC ounce, we have a tool called the PMC calculator that lets you do trades in real time. I mean, nothing's happening, it's mock, but you get to see what gets purchased, how the allocation, you see the logic behind it. This is all at neptuneglobal.com. So neptuneglobal.com. From there, you'll see our phone number if you want to call and speak to us, and we can answer questions. You can also hit the contact tab and send an email request in. And we just encourage anyone to come on. I'm happy to say the PMC ounce is doing extremely well because it's logical and it's price competitive. We buy metals in very big quantities for the clients, so it keeps it very price competitive, especially compared to things like buying silver as an individual. So I just encourage people to come and learn about us, and hopefully we can help some people out there.
Well, Chris Blasi, I thank you for taking time with us. Looking forward to continue to stay in tune with what you have going on, and to also check into more of the PMC ounce for myself. So I thank you for sharing your wealth of knowledge with us here on Rethinking a Dollar.
Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate the call and the interview.
Thank you.